De aquella viene la revolución, para que se asustan será para mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando, ¡viva la revolución!
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
La bestialidad imperialista. Bestialidad que no tiene una frontera determinada ni pertenece a un país determinado. Bestias fueron las hordas hitleristas, como bestias son los norteamericanos hoy, como bestias son los paracaidistas belgas, como bestias fueron los imperialistas franceses en Argelia. Porque es la naturaleza del imperialismo la que bestializa a los hombres, la que la convierte en fieras sedientas de sangre que están dispuestas a degollar, a asesinar, a destruir hasta la última imagen de un revolucionario, de un partidario de un régimen que haya caído bajo su bota o que luche por su libertad. Y la estatua que recuerda a Lumumba, hoy destruida pero mañana reconstruida, nos recuerda también en la historia trágica de ese mártir de la revolución del mundo, que no se puede confiar en el imperialismo, pero ni tantito, nada.
Porque marcó una senda e hizo una revolución. Ahora lo quieren callar, lo quieren sacrificar, porque a fuerza de balas le quitan su libertad. Una madrugada de gorilas y terror, secuestran al presidente y violan la Constitución. Contra el golpe militar, resistencia popular, pues no podrán vencer al gran pueblo de Morazán. Honduras, el pueblo está contigo. Honduras, un pueblo que no calla. Honduras, resiste la batalla, pa' que vuelva aquel que no te falla. Honduras, el pueblo está contigo.
Solo por el prurito de oponerse a una encuesta han dado un golpe de Estado.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 43, Unmasking Imperialism, Exposing Imperialist Propaganda in Mainstream Media. Today, we're talking about elections in Honduras, the prospects for socialism. El pueblo resiste, Frente Nacional de Resistencia Popular. Since 2009, the Honduran people have been resisting capitalism, imperialism, struggling for their liberation, national sovereignty. My people of Honduras are today on the cusp of seeing if we will choose the path, as the old saying goes, socialism or barbarism. And joining me today are two good comrades. First is Cristian Padilla Romero, a Honduran with roots in the Department of Olancho, who fights for change in his home country, our home country of Honduras. Cristian is currently studying the history of Honduras at Yale University. How's it going, Cristian? Hold on, let me unmute you. There you go.
Thank you, Ramiro, for having me. I'm doing well and excited at what the prospects of what's going on today. I'll talk more about that and also the backdrop of the past decade, which has been, as you know, horrible for our country. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Most definitely. And also joining us, one of my homies, my comrades, somebody who I consider family, José Luis Granados Ceja, who's part of the CESPAD International Observation Mission, an independent Mexican journalist. He's in Honduras right now. So that's why it kind of sounds a little bit like that. How's it going, brother?
It's going really well. I'm really glad to be here. That's right. I'm coming to you live from the community of Buenos Aires, in the capital of Tegucigalpa, Honduras. And so I apologize for the noise, but
No worries, man. So José Luis is actually in Honduras right now. He's in Tegucigalpa. We all know, unfortunately, with neoliberalism, with capitalism, how crappy the connections can be in Latin America and the Caribbean with capitalism. So if it is a little noisy, there's a lot of people where he's at right now. But why don't we, before we get into going directly to José Luis to give us a sense of what the situation is like on the ground right now. Obviously, we're talking about the election that's going on today as we speak. The polls, I think, are just wrapping up, but we'll hear from José Luis in a second about that. Basically, what's up for grabs is the president of Honduras. The main three candidates are Xiomara Castro de Celaya, representing Libre, Partido Libre. That's my party. That's the Democratic Socialist Leftist Party of Honduras that promotes 21st century socialism, that wants to begin trading with the People's Republic of China and not ROC, or quote unquote Taiwan, as some people call it. She is somebody who is pro-Venezuela, pro-Cuba, pro-Nicaragua, wants to trade more with Latin America and get rid of fundamentally this capitalist imperialist system that has destroyed the country since 2009. And she's somebody who I have a lot of respect for. This is her third time running. This is the third time that the previous two times in 2013 and in 2017, she was robbed of her electoral victory. So this is a very crucial moment because this will show, this is somebody who has been through that electoral process several times, has been cheated several times, and hopefully she will come out as a victor today. Also running is Nasri Asfoura, who is with the National Party. He's of Palestinian origin. Unfortunately, he represents the National Party, right-wing, evangelical, Zionist, capitalist party. So he is somebody who represents the narco-dictatorship of Honduras, represents the interests of the U.S. embassy and the U.S. regime in Honduras, somebody who's involved in the drug trade openly and makes no secret about it. So he's somebody that Xiomara Castro is facing up against. And also Yanni Rosenthal, who is with the Liberal Party, who is more in the metropolitan banking elite type. He's somebody who has a lot of power in Honduras. He is somebody who's not necessarily as openly right-wing as the National Party, but still is in favor of capitalism and imperialism, and somebody who still wants to collaborate with the U.S. government, a kinder, gentler face of right-wing reactionary governance in Honduras. So Yanni Rosenthal's with the Liberal Party. So keep in mind, right, you have Xiomara Castro Celaya, who's like Honduran, from Honduras, from the campo, from representing the people. And then you have Nasri Asfoura, who represents the wealthy. In Honduras, they call them the Turcos because they came after the Ottoman Empire. But it was a wealthy diaspora of Palestinian Lebanese who came to Honduras, who became the merchant class. And he represents the National Party. Yanni Rosenthal is somebody, I would have to check exactly his lineage, but obviously you can tell not from Honduras, or somebody who doesn't have roots there, just moved there, who has very powerful financial interests in the country. So Xiomara is representing like her nation, her people. So this is really interesting. And I think this election will be a trial to see what the future holds for the quote unquote pink tide, or the red wave in Latin America, as we call it. And what I want to do is maybe let's just check in on Jose to see. He's in Tegucigalpa right now. He's with the people right now. Why don't you give us a sense of like what's happening? Like, has the voting finished? What have you been seeing? And what made you want to go to Honduras?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm here in the community of Buenos Aires, in the capital of Tegucigalpa, Honduras. This is a working class neighborhood. There is a lot of noise because there's a lot of people who are trying to make sure that they have the opportunity to participate in this election. What we've seen is obviously an effort to suppress the vote, an effort to limit the people's ability to express themselves through the ballot box. And on this occasion, it's important to talk about why there's such an emphasis on this election and on participating and affecting political change through the ballot box in this occasion. So the situation is such. As you mentioned, Honduras is living under a narco dictatorship. All of the party activists from Libre that I've talked to have stressed this point. Honduras has been living under a dictatorship since the coup in 2009, which I was mentioned. But the group who installed themselves in power, and more specifically Juan Orlando Hernandez, who's been the president over the last 8 years, is somebody who is closely tied to narco trafficking. And what that means is that he's ceased to be even a bourgeois representative of the state. Right, what he's become is a representative of an organized crime interest, and what we sometimes call in Spanish la captación del Estado. The state has been completely taken over and put into the hands of an individual who's at the service of transnational capitalism and organized crime on a transnational basis. And why am I able to say that with such authority? Because we just need to look at who his brother is. He was literally convicted by a U.S. court for drug trafficking, and now obviously he denies it. But everybody here on the ground knows there's got to be a connection there. How is it possible that the president's brother was able to, export? We're talking about kilos of cocaine into the United States. You can only do that with the protection of the state. And so obviously that's the issue that is first, front and foremost in the minds of the Honduran people. And as we see them, what they're hoping to do is reestablish at least some sort of sense of democratic normalcy in the country. And while you mentioned, that the leftist candidate in this race is Xiomara Castro, representing the Libre party, but they built a broad coalition because that's precisely what they're looking for. What is the present moment demanding of the Honduran people? A restoration of at least as a form of liberal democracy. And I mention that because I think one of the things that we should take into consideration when we're talking about any country in Latin America, from my point of view, the primary contradiction continues to be imperialism and national liberation. And I think in this particular case, we're talking about national liberation with a perspective towards socialism. If we're able to reestablish some kind of situation where there can be a more free exercise of simple democratic values, we're talking about these are social conquests that were achieved long ago, back into the normalcy of the country, then we'll be able to have the foundations to actually advance the political struggle and take it to a new phase, which is actually going to be able to begin to question the fundamentals of capitalism. Obviously, on the campaign trail, that has not been what people have been talking about. What they've been talking about is about the need to end 12 years of National Party rule, 8 years of the narco dictatorship under Juan Orlando Hernandez. And another point that I think I really want to stress, I've been participating here as an international election observer, accompanying the Honduran people as they try to proceed in this process that I just finished explaining. But the thing is, there was a lot of reforms that were made. The previous election in 2017 was a naked fraud. Let me just say this. When the OAS says you should redo your election, it was a pretty dirty election. And so there was a lot of struggle to get to this point, to actually have not a fair playing ground, but at least a little bit less uneven. And this isn't because some expert from North America came here and gave lessons to the Honduran people about how to run an election, or because the OAS made a series of recommendations. No. What this was, Hondurans on the street, organized through their grassroots organizations, but also through their political organizations, in this case Libre, to say that these are the conditions that we need, these are the minimums that we need to be able to really feel like this is going to be a worthwhile exercise, that you're not going to fight and steal the election from us once again. And so that is how we got to this point. So we have a slightly better system, and that's actually proven to be a fruitful struggle, because as we've been observing the vote, I'll give you an anecdote. One of the ways that they steal votes here is by giving people fake ID cards. So what did they do? They redid the electoral rolls. Everybody has new ID cards. I was observing one particular poll in particular. A gentleman comes in, he gives his ID card. They have these new biometric machines with read your fingerprints, which, by the way, was one of the countries that really was a pioneer in doing that kinds of election guarantees, Venezuela. But that's for another day. And so he puts his thumb in, the machine doesn't recognize it, the poll attendant says, oh, no problem. We have a plan B. These things happen. We'll take your picture. The guy gets scared. He says, like, you know what? I'm not going to vote. So what does that tell us? That was probably a fraudulent effort to try to make a vote that wasn't actually reflective of that particular person's ID card. So those kinds of little things are the things that are helping reduce. Is there irregularities? Absolutely. There have been irregularities like there are in every election system throughout the world. I will also wager to say that this is a far more accountable election system than the ones that we find in the United States and Canada. You know, you come in, you present your card, they check it with a registry where your own picture appears, then you go through the various processes to receive your ballots. You then turn in the ballot is signed, you drop it personally into the ballot box, then you get the indelible ink on your finger, and these are mechanisms to help prevent the fraud from becoming widespread. And that's the key thing, to keep the fraud from being widespread. And what does that mean? That means that there will actually hopefully be an authentic representation of the will of the people in the results. So polls are starting to close now, but with the large crowds that we're seeing here, for example, at this voting center, they're going to keep it open so that everybody has the opportunity to vote. That in and of itself is also a struggle, because we know that one of the key things that is also used to suppress the vote to carry out the fraud is by suppressing the vote, by making it difficult. This morning we found out that there was an attack on the server from the National Electoral Council that tells people where they should vote. And so these are different tactics. Why does that matter? Because if you reduce the amounts of voters, every one of those fraudulent votes becomes more valuable. If you increase the turnout, then there's less value, right? And so that fraudulent vote may get in there, but the other ones, the legitimate votes, are so much that it becomes overwhelming. And I've been making this comparison a lot to people here, and I think it helps us understand. If people remember Mexico 2018, similar situation. We're talking about decades of rule by neoliberal interests, finally an opportunity for López Obrador, who himself had to suffer through an electoral fraud in 2006 and also in 2012, although that one operated a little bit differently. The mood in the country was so much that they couldn't stop. Yes, they did all of their dirty tricks. They did their vote buying, their vote suppression, but the turnout was so much, the mood for change was so much that it was overwhelming, and it defeated all of those efforts at fraud. I think that that's what's happening here in Honduras. I think here in Honduras what we have is a mood for change that is overwhelming. You can hear people cheering behind me. I'll give you another anecdote. Speaking to people, they will say, me and my family, we're National Party supporters. We have been our whole lives. But this time, me and my family, we're not going to vote for the National Party. We're going to vote for Libre because things have to change. And I think that really captures the mood in the country right now. People saying that we've had enough and it's time for something to happen. And that the machine that the National Party is, because we have to admit, it is an efficient political machine that's able to hold votes, that's able to buy votes, that's able to leverage the money that it receives from the state, that uses public programs to win support. It may not be enough this time. Of course, one final thing, and I apologize for going on so long, it's really important to defend the people's victory. So if we get the results tonight, which is really important, there's a quick count that's called the TREP, T-R-E-P, which is a quick count that should give us an idea very quickly. That should probably tell us tonight if Xiomara Castro has succeeded in defeating the candidate of the National Party, Papi a la orden, if you can believe that's actually what his name is, Daddy at the ready, which is like the way that we've been translating it. But of course, the National Party is still very much in control of a lot of the state institutions. There's a fear that there may be an effort to suppress the results from coming out. So there it's really important, especially people in North America. Obviously, the people of Honduras are going to take up the challenge, take up the task of defending their will, and they will do what's necessary. Obviously, there is a call for peace. They want everybody to respect the results. That's what everybody I've talked to as well said, that it's very important that no matter who wins, that there isn't an effort to steal that result. But also in North America, to say, hey, if there is an effort to steal this, we're not going to let this happen. Because in a country like Honduras, as I said, what's the primary contradiction? National liberation versus imperialism. Imperialism is a very important role in backing up that regime. Juan Orlando Hernandez, when he re-elected himself illegitimately, was able to save power because the U.S. embassies allowed it to happen. Now, if you are able to build an anti-imperialist force in the United States to pressure the U.S. to not allow that to happen again, you're doing a favor to the Honduran people and allowing them to choose their own destiny.
Wow, thank you so much for that. That's such a great update. And again, that's my comrade, Jose Luis Granados Ceja. He's live in Tegucigalpa right now. Make sure to follow him on Twitter, by the way, at Granados Ceja, GRANADOSCEJA. I'll put the link in the description. Jose, can you stay with us a little bit longer, or are you going to have to dip out, or what's the deal?
I can stay for a little bit longer. We can do another segment.
Cool. Perfect. That sounds good. So what I want to do, I want to pass it over to Cristian. Maybe Cristian, tell us a little bit about the significance of the election. Also for the diaspora, we know both of us are part of the Honduran diaspora. We're the children of migrants or migrants ourselves who have fled the nation because of capitalism and imperialism. What impact does this have to the migrant Honduran community and just the region overall? Because our people are spread out in Mexico and Guatemala and the US. And any analysis that you have so far of the election?
Yeah, man. I mean, again, thank you for having me. I think these elections are just as important as they were back in 2017 and 2013. These elections are supposed to be where a government is actually chosen by a majority of the people, and we know for a fact that this hasn't been the case, at the very least since the coup, right? And so, at the very least, just as a matter of principle, if the elections are fair enough, open enough, clean enough, I think the victory for sure will be for the Liberty Party. Of course, we know all the tampering and all the cheating that's done, but I think that's just the first step. After that is honestly, I'm just waiting to see what the actual plans of both the government from the government side, but also the organized sectors, how that relationship will continue. Is going to be a complementary one, which, a lot of progress will be made in different areas. I mean, one of the things with Honduras is that many different areas are in need of very different things, right? And so it's going to require, as we know, a lot of effort from the state, obviously, but also from, the organized communities. And as far as the diaspora, I know it must be, it's important in general, because as we know, the diaspora is pretty much the one holding down the Honduran economy with remittances. I mean, like most of Latin America, but specifically Central America and Mexico, the remittances are, that and the narco money is what's holding up the country, because there's no other real production other than, the few industries, but even they are not, big enough. And so hopefully, this change will create something, an effort or a direction in which the country will become productive in the sense of, being able to sustain itself, not through this sort of isolationist thing, but through broader integration with Central American countries, Latin America specifically, and in a more just, distribution of the economy, right? All things like that. And hopefully also at the same time, it means that less people have to leave, right? And so, obviously, we understand that once people do leave, immigrants and refugees, that's totally acceptable and should be, welcomed here, and that's, a valid thing. But at the same time, we should be fighting for the ability to not leave, right? If people, a lot of people are proud of where they're from, and ideally they want to stay there, if given the opportunity to live a good and just life. That's not the case right now, which is why so many Hondurans are leaving. And so, there's a lot of hope here. With this, I think at the very least, just knowing that the nationalist party is going to be gone, but also that there's a possibility for an actual transformation, and like a significant transformation. And like I said, nothing will, it's really hard to predict. It's gonna come down to the both the effort from the state, how well the political factions maintain their organizational capacity, as we've seen like in Bolivia and Venezuela, and like, where, the people have, once they took state power, they fought to keep it, and they pushed, the state to stay committed to, the principles of any of the social programs. And so, it's definitely exciting. I mean, to be honest, 2017 was this exciting, like, when we were seeing it, and then we know how it happened day by day, how it was literally stolen. 2013 also was like that, but it was different. But 2017 was just so egregious, right? That we're like, people are like, oh yeah, we won. But this dude, like, pulled another surprise. And so that's why I'm always like into it's official. It's really hard to say. And even then, it's gonna, as we've seen like in Bolivia, even when that happens, we know the right wing, we know the fascist, obviously the imperialist, all those different factions are going to try to, sabotage or do their usual activities. And so, again, it's going to require continued effort from all the sectors to get this victory and maintain it for the long term, hopefully.
Yeah, most definitely. And I Kinky had in the chat had a really interesting quote. She said, when Biden announces, quote, a sham election in Honduras, we'll know Libre won. That's a great quote right there by Kinky out in Cali. That's exactly right. Because also, as Abner pointed out, the OAS did nothing wrong. Sorry, the OAS did nothing against the 2017 fraud, but make a few limp-wristed remarks while they push for sanctions in Venezuela and Nicaragua. The OAS has stayed completely silent when it comes to Honduras. Political activists, Berta Cáceres, Margarita Murillo killed, and nothing about getting rid of the Honduran government because it's basically a puppet state of U.S. imperialism and capitalism. But countries that are liberating themselves from U.S. imperialism, like Venezuela, like Cuba, like Nicaragua, the so-called troika of tyranny, they get all of the media attention. They get slammed every day by mainstream media, and it's just really disgusting. As Left is Best said, OES is an arm of the U.S. state. And even Fidel Castro called it the U.S. Ministry of Colonies. And shout out to Comrade Libre, by the way. Thank God Nicaragua left the OAS. Exactly right. The OAS has no future for any country in Latin America and the Caribbean that wants to move away from the dollar and imperialism. What I want to do is I just want to play a quick clip of the election today. This is from Telesur. And then we'll go after the clip, we'll go to Comrade José, just to give for him to give us some last minute remarks about the situation on the ground. So let me just play this.
We begin in Honduras, where with just days to go before the general elections, the population is optimistic about a possible change of government. But there is also uncertainty due to the political violence reported. Our correspondent, Gilda Silvestrucci, brings us more details.
The daily lives of Hondurans continue as normal. In the squares, people continue with their daily activities, such as Don Raúl Soto, who sells water to earn a living.
Sincerely, to support a family, this is no good. But to be able to make it through the day, because right now I have no obligations, it's just me.
Although he no longer has a family that depends on him, he assures he will vote for a change so that his children can find work.
Because I have daughters, and they are professionals, and in this government there has been nothing. If we continue with this government, we will die of hunger.
5 million Hondurans are registered in the electoral roll, and a massive turnout is expected due to the mood perceived among the population.
I am in the best of spirits, and let's trust in God that we can go out to vote early, go out with all the willingness and with all the civic and patriotic enthusiasm to cast our ballots. We hope for a change in this country. We have seen 12 years of conservative dictatorship, and we can't stand anymore.
Although there have been signs of violence in recent weeks, this does not seem to deter voters, who are confident the process will bring about change.
Of course, there has to be a change. We are optimistic. We cannot continue with corrupt governments.
And yes, there is certain fear, but there is also courage, joy, and people in the streets tell us it is forbidden to be afraid.
So I'm going to pass it over to Compañero José, because he said he has some really important news. What are you hearing on the ground?
Okay, we got some breaking news. This is coming from the headquarters of the Libre Party here in Tegucigalpa. They are calling the election for Libre. Xiomara Castro has won the election according to the exit polls conducted by the Libre Party. According to the information coming to me, this is all very preliminary. 15% up in the polls of the exit polls here in the 2021 Honduran election. This is significant. This is big. Early in the day, we actually had the National Party do a press conference, and they were trying to set this narrative that they had won the election. They were receiving an overwhelming amount of votes. I think it's clear those kinds of numbers, if you're getting 15% above your nearest rival at the exit polls, that means precisely what I was talking about happened. A mass turnout, massive support for the Libre Party. The usual base of support for the National Party did not come out to vote for them this time, and if they did, some of them probably voted for Libre to end the narco dictatorship of Honduras. It is an absolute honor to be able to share this news with you directly live as we're getting this. You might even hear some fireworks going off. There's a lot of commotion happening right now, a lot of emotion. It looks like she has secured the victory. It looks like at the end of the narco dictatorship of Juan Orlando Hernandez. Of course, it does not end here. There are still threats. I'm reminded of the fact that they talked about assassinating Lucho Arce in Bolivia after he had been killed. It's very important that we don't stop paying attention to what's happening in Honduras, particularly those who believe in the anti-imperialist struggle, because this is just the first step. Like I said, this is a struggle for national liberation with perspective towards socialism. That means that we need to support the Honduran people in their political struggle to actually be able to take the reins of power, of state power here in Honduras, to begin to dismantle the narco dictatorship, but also open the path to the grassroots organizations, the indigenous land defenders, the peoples of Honduras who are fighting to rebuild their country and to have a state where they can live with dignity, to bring an end to this neoliberalism that's been married with organized crime. The struggle ahead is long, it will be arduous, and it will require international solidarity. So I really appreciate being able to meet here with you and share this meeting directly, and with your viewers and listeners, who obviously are people who understand the importance of accompanying our processes and building the anti-imperialist struggle, because that's the struggle that we need to advance in order for us here in the Global South, people like myself in Mexico, people here in Honduras and who are trying to forge a path to build socialism of the 21st century. I'm really glad that I was able to share with you. You can hear the cheers. There's a lot of energy. Again, also very important to keep an eye on things to make sure that there isn't any action by the military authorities, who are obviously closely allied with the regime that has now been voted out of office. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. I'll have to leave now because I had to go back to the coverage here and following the results. And obviously things are very, very hectic, and it presents a little bit of a security situation. So I just want to keep my head above my shoulders as we go out here to talk with the masses and to see how they feel about this result.
Thank you so much, brother Luis. Make sure, take care, man. Hope all is well. Make sure to follow him at Granados Ceja on Twitter for all of the updates about Honduras. He is in Honduras right now in Tegucigalpa, and he's saying that Libre is ahead. Libre is winning. Libre has declared, Xiomara Castro has declared herself president of Honduras, which is tremendous success. I don't drink, so I'm going to drink water, but that is amazing. And, me and Cristian we've seen this before twice. So hopefully, fingers crossed, all goes well. But it seems like all the preliminary reports are saying that Libre is ahead in all polls and Libre is declaring victory. So hopefully all is well. What I want to do, Cristian, I want to play a clip. This is a clip from a documentary called Resistencia. And it's a really good documentary about the 2009 coup in Honduras, because we have to remember, just for some context for people who aren't Hondureño or who haven't followed it, in 2009, we had a left-leaning president, Manuel Zelaya, who was moving toward building socialism in the country. He wasn't necessarily 100% radical or anything, but he was just trying to make progressive changes, get rid of the U.S. military bases, get rid of neoliberalism. He wanted to join ALBA, trade with Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. And a few days after joining the Bolivarian Alliance for Nuestra America, they carried out the coup on June 28, 2009. They kidnapped him in his pajamas and dropped him off in the jungles of Costa Rica, where he was left by himself, and he had to come all the way back to Nicaragua, eventually was in the Dominican Republic for exile. And ever since that coup in 2009, everybody who supported his government, everybody who was a leftist, Afro-Indigenous, Garifuna, Lenca, all of the people who in any way supported him were targeted, murdered, killed. I personally know somebody, Margarita Murillo, who was murdered by the coup regime in Honduras. She's somebody I met in 2012 who was fighting. She was a communist. She was fighting against the right-wing National Party government. and she was murdered. She was murdered in Omoa, in the northern state of Omoa, and she was killed for her activism. Berta Cáceres is obviously somebody who we know has gotten a lot of attention, and rightfully so, because she spoke out against the coup. So this is the context, right? It's 12 years of the most brutal right-wing US-backed military harshness. Like, I don't even know how to explain it, just complete chaos. So I want to play a clip of this documentary called Resistencia about the 2009 coup. And then Cristian, we'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit about the impact of the coup and how this election hopefully will reverse that.
The president of Honduras says he's the victim of a coup. He says he was brutally kidnapped by soldiers.
The coup was carried out on the very day Hondurans were supposed to be voting on a referendum to write a new constitution. A popular uprising began immediately. I arrived as a video journalist 115 days after the coup, and there were still daily demonstrations nationwide, in opposition to the first coup in Central America in more than 3 decades.
¿Por qué está detenido él? Solamente por estar aquí, haciendo presencia, sin ninguna razón. No ando un corta uñas, no ando nada.
I wanted to find out more about the proposal to convoke a national constitutional assembly with representation from every profession, identity, and region in the country. A movement to bring equal participatory democracy to one of the most unequal countries in the world.
Esto no nos intimida. No vamos a dejar las calles. Seguiremos en resistencia porque queremos una constituyente. Y si alguno de los compañeros los matan, seremos velados en la Plaza de la Libertad con mucha honra y orgullo.
I was convinced the resistance was going to reverse the coup. It was 4 months in, and not a single country in the world had officially recognized the regime of Roberto Micheletti. There was no election campaign, all the major international observers refused to participate, and the same military that overthrew the elected president 5 months earlier was in charge of transporting the ballot boxes.
Aquí lo que hay es una farsa. Cualquier país, cualquier persona que avale este proceso es definitivamente golpista y es antidemocrático.
Porfirio Lobo's been elected the new president of Honduras.
Most Latin American governments denounced the elections as fraudulent, while Western media and governments moved quickly to legitimize the new face of the coup. International aid that had been suspended was restored, and it looked like the resistance was defeated. Less than 2 weeks later, news arrived that Miguel Facuse's palm oil plantations had been taken over.
Resistencia, the fight for Aguan Valley. Highly recommend it. It's on YouTube, by the way, if y'all are able to watch it. 12 years of resistance. The people continue to resist all over the country. Cristian, your analysis of the impact of the coup, how people have been resisting, and how the good, the bad, the ugly.
Yeah, I mean, the impact of the coup fundamentally was a regression of democracy. I mean, you know, it's hard to say that Honduras was democratic and, you know, or Latin America was democratic hardly, right, during the 80s and 90s, during the height of the neoliberalism, or what's called the lost decade. But we saw a change, a Latin American change, right, starting with the election of Hugo Chavez and the whole, you know, North Americans call it pink tide because they didn't want to legitimize the leftist nature of it. But it was a popular movement that, you know, Chavez fought really hard among other nations, pretty much to, you know, reverse or remove the neoliberal model. You know, with, like, as you said, with Zelaya, he was he won in 2005 under like the Liberal Party, which is actually a party running today, which is pretty much like a center. It was like a, you know, what it sounds like, a Liberal Party, less right wing than the National Party, but you know, for some reason, and this part's still really unknown, like he actually started listening to the basically grassroots movement in the sense of, I've heard from Garifuna activists from different organizations where literally he would allow them to come into the presidential palace and talk to him about, this is going on in our communities. That started the conversation about the referendum, right? Or like a referendum to see whether people wanted to hold a referendum, right, on a new constitution, right, which is super common in Latin America. I mean, Latin American countries come up with new constitutions all the time because most of them are sham, right? And so it was a vote, a proposed for a vote to have a referendum, not a referendum. So that's often kind of like misunderstood. It was like, we should have a constituent assembly to come up with a new constitution. Why? Because the previous constitution is from 1982, which was under a military dictatorship. So it's understandably that people want a new constitution, right? And so that was enough to scare all the right-wing elite forces, to scare the U.S. Government, and so the coup happened. It actually was supported by his own party, the Liberal Party. So right, which is the reason why there's a new Libre Party, because the Liberal Party, basically supported the coup, as well as the National Party. And so pretty much, literally during those last few years of Zelaya, it was a huge potential of an opening of democracy in so many different ways. Like, do what Venezuela did with with basically having a new constitution, do what Bolivia did in 2005, what Ecuador did. All these countries that, all these Latin American countries that were trying to move to the left or trying to basically expand democracy so people actually have a say in the country that they live in, that was unacceptable for Honduras. And so, the right-wing forces, did what they did in one of the most egregious things that it could have been done, similar to happening in Haiti in 2004, and actually the coup in Venezuela in 2002, right, which is, an attempt. And so what we saw after that was obviously like what's a regression in that, quite literally the opposite. So as quite literally democracy was expanding, the right-wing forces had to do what they always do best, which is when they see people rising up to demand like democratic basically movements, they do the opposite, which is to crush it or try to crush it. And so the way they did that was through overthrowing Zelaya. And so, I mean, after that, the story is what it is today, right? Which is Zelaya, pretty much a new militarized country, has received so much military assistance from the United States to the point where, every aspect of society is controlled by the military, in a military in which is actually part of the pretty much, doing the service of the narco industry, right? So as we know, like the president's brother has been, convicted here for basically landing, Colombian, planes with drugs, having the military and the national police pretty much make sure that goes, uninhibited in any way. So it's hard to, the president, as we know, I mean, Honduras is quite literally the definition of a narco state. I would say, in a bigger degree than Mexico was before Obrador, right? Like in the sense that it's, all echelons of the state are pretty much corrupted in that way. And so, I mean, so that's where we saw anyone who's doing any social justice work, environmental defenders, indigenous right defenders, feminist organizations, all these different organizations, they were the first ones targeted. Why? Because they were the most organized, the highly organized, who were being the most strategic and the most forceful in calling out the coup and trying to have a new, basically return democracy to the country in some significant way. And unfortunately, it's been sabotaged by everyone. So 2009, right after the coup, they did the sham elections, as we saw in the video, where Pepe Lobo won, who himself is also a narco pretty much. Then in 2013 is when Juan Orlando won. He was the president of the Congress, and that was sham. I mean, you talk to anybody, literally, I mean, all the tactics they do, like shut down electricity in certain places so people can't vote. I knew somebody through my sister who was there at the time, who I think her brother worked at one of the electric companies, the state-run electric companies, and he literally said, we got orders to turn off the electricity in this place. This is 2013, by the way, and so they barely won. So things like that. I mean, the number of ways in which all the tactics are are innumerable. So but anyway, so that's just, I mean, but 2017 was obviously the much more egregious one, because the president who was rated the president ran again unconstitutionally. There's no presidents can't rerun according to the Honduran Constitution. He basically got his Supreme Court to change that, which they couldn't, and then that's how he ran. And even then, he didn't win the actual votes. I mean, we can go over the details, but basically he lost. But he finessed the system in a way in which he was able to say, I actually won with the numbers. I mean, and again, during this time, Trump was president. So, I mean, any even pretension of kind of accountability from the U.S., which sometimes you could do with some of the Democratic presidents, because you can call them out on some of their hypocrisy to some extent, that wasn't even possible. So, he stayed on for the next 4 years. And, and here we are. So the Nationalist Party, any sort of legitimacy or any sort of leadership that they had was from him, because he was this pretty much this, this figure which hated by most people, but still seen as who he was, the National Party leader. He's not running again, so they pretty much have no gas. Obviously, if anything, everyone recognizes that party as the most corrupted party, and so. In last minute, we saw an alliance form between, Nasrallah, who was the candidate in 2017, who won and who wasn't given the victory. And then even quickly, and even at some point with the Liberal Party too, but I think that broke. And so, that was the impact of Honduras. It became a much more violent country. Poverty increased. All the bad, social indicators pretty much worsened, and which was the opposite of what was happening like the last 2 years of Cela's administration. The economy was improving, inequality was going down. I mean, he raised the minimum wage, or he did all these things. That literally was just reversed like overnight, and then expanded over the years. And so that's the impact. The death of more poor people, the death of more indigenous Black people. I mean, that's what the coup has meant. The death of more journalists, the death of anybody trying to do good work.
Right.
They were given a death sentence pretty much, and that's what's been the impact. But at the same time, and this is a historical thing. It also kind of, in a way, it did wake up the Honduran people in a sense of like, there's a widely recognized mass movement, or like a politicization of the country in a way that is very fruitful. So, the fact that there's such a thing as a Libre party, and not just that is not a third party. It's like now the major party. Before that, the Liberal National Party, they just interchanged every 4 years. So it was like this thing. So that alone is a victory. The fact that there's a third alternative, one that's much more, it seems, popular. And so that, that's the dialectic of, revolution and movements, right? Which is that, at the same time, repression and violence, in a way does forces people to organize in a way, because livelihoods are at stake in that way, and the militarization of the country for sure caused that. So yeah, these are exciting times. Hopefully, like we said, the victory that's been claimed stays true, and also it's actually enforced. As we know, though, the military has the last say in Honduras. So when they align with the civilian leaders appointed, it's fine. But this is going to be. This could be another conversation, but that's going to be another sort of discussion about that, because take an example of the Cuban Revolution. Castro got rid of the old military pretty much, right? Because they're the ones who had the power. And in Latin America, and this could be a discussion about how to move away from things like that. The military is the last arbiter of power, and so for Honduras, it's the military has always been leaning more right wing in terms of picking its people. It's also been aligned more with the United States, because all their generals are trained in the U.S. And so we'll see how all of that unveils, and given the history, I'm more hopeful this time. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely. I'm glad you mentioned the government. I think it's something that, and the government and the military, because it's something that's very important to note that in Honduras, the military has a very, very powerful role in society. I have to say, even so, my cousin's husband, he was the former general of the Honduran military. Most of my family,
not your cousin, but like which general?
Arnulfo Cantarero.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And he was the general of the Honduran military, and he's somebody. I went to his old house, so I'm the only communist in my family. So and in Honduras, being a communist, that's like mad dangerous. So I went to their spot and I see all these plaques, School of the Americas, Fort Benning, Georgia. And it's really disgusting to see that, you know, and to be honest with you, I don't really fuck with that side of my family in general. They were during the 80s, they helped the Contras, you know, to fight the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. And it's crazy because I know firsthand just how much power the Honduran military has. They get direct training, not just from the U.S. military, but also the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. You know, that's a whole nother thing, like the role of Zionism in Honduras, the evangelical churches, and how they spread anti-indigenous, anti-Garifuna propaganda, where they portray indigenous peoples as demonic, as being El Diablo and all this stuff. I don't know if you've encountered that.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, that's again, this goes back to the deep historical sort of religious history of Honduras. So it's still a very much, I mean, historically like a Catholic country where most people believe in the Catholic tradition. But there's a big evangelical, like Protestant Pentecostal movement, which is, I would say, when it comes into like political forms, it's a lot more right wing. It's a lot, and even in social ways, it's really right wing because it paints everything. You know, the history of Catholicism in Latin America is that in many ways it blended with a lot of indigenous religion, spirituality, and all that, because it was much more open in that, like with the saints and all that. With Pentecostal, with evangelical, it's like no, like, you know, like it's all this, you know, different customs that have been autonomous in Latin America are seen as, you know, backward and demonic and all this, like you said. But yeah, with the question of the military, it goes back to that, which is that it quite literally is United States. You know, up until the like 50s, Central American countries basically had no military, no real military. And it wasn't until the effort of the United States to militarize these countries so they could be able to control these countries that started. And you see where that didn't happen. Costa Rica, there is no militarized sort of history of you know, sort of the kind of violence that there is for these other countries. Why? Because the military wasn't, you know, Costa Rica basically abolished the military, and so yeah, it has a national police, and you know, it still has the monopoly on violence in that way, but not to the degree that it does with, you know, it can't carry out the things that the Salvadoran and Guatemalan militaries did in the 80s, right? Which is so
horrible.
Yeah, so that's just, you know, it goes back to the United States. The United States has pretty much been the one that has militarized, funded all these, you know, all these countries, and has, you know, been the cause of all that. So
I want to read this tweet. This is from former President Manuel Zelaya, the president who was ousted in the coup, also the husband of Xiomara Castro de Zelaya, who so far has been declared winner. Manuel Zelaya said, quote, "We won the opposition alliance headed by Xiomara Castro Z, which is her, Salvador Narrala, and Doris Gutierrez, Honduras Humana y Liberales en Oposición." So basically, the opposition alliance are calling for a press conference at 8 p.m. Honduras time, which I think is literally like in a few minutes, at the headquarters of Partido Libre. So they're going to be doing a press conference soon. And so basically he's saying it right now, ganamos, we won. So, you know, we'll see how it turns out. I mean, I think like you, Cristian, we're both kind of like, obviously we want Libre to win, but we've seen this happen like a lot of times, you know? So we'll see. For sure. What do you think? What do you think is going to happen?
It's hard to say, because the thing is, it usually has to do with how, you know, I unfortunately haven't been keeping up too much with the you know, how organized the right wing has been, right? So that's usually where the detail is. It's like, are they down to like pull all their cards, which is, you know, could be as far as like, okay, we got the general who says he's gonna declare us. You know what I'm saying? Like they could go as far as that. Obviously, that's gonna, you know, be a whole different situation. So that, and also, you know, how well, you know, how the people defend it. But let me just say this one thing I wanted to say too about the another importance of this election, and it's in no way want to equate it with, the kind of things we see in the U.S., which is the fact that Xiomara would be the first woman president. It's big. For Latin America, it's not big because Latin America has actually had more. Anything. The United States has zero, obviously, but has had women presidents for a long time, but for Honduras has not. And so it is a big thing. And not just that, obviously, not just the fact that she's a woman, but also that her political alignment is actually a lot more aligned to the ideals of what we consider should be like things like, feminism and leftist, social justice in general. So that's a big one because, Honduras has not, she would be the first female president. So I think that alone is big. And on top of that, the fact that, her politics are actually aligned with what we believe should be, the significance or something like that, right? Not just the fact that it's not another man. So that's, that would be big in general. And then there's also, just talk about a lot of one of the ways that the right wing has used that as a sort of a way to dismiss, delegitimize her is that their sexism is so high that they say that because she's a woman, she doesn't really have the actual power in the relationship. So she's just like a tool of male, which is obviously like this misogynistic thing that says that, the woman, never actually has a say. And so, like she can't be an autonomous person with her own. Obviously, they're part of the political party, so I'm sure they coordinate all this. But to say that she's just gonna be a puppet of him is obviously ridiculous. But that's just another sexist thing from the right wing, obviously. And but this takes on popular understanding too because it plays on that. So I do think it's something dangerous. That's I wanted to mention because it's a big thing.
No, it's a great point. The difference between proletarian feminism, working class feminism, and bourgeois liberal feminism. Howard Saldana said Lobo Sosa's wife, I heard, was currently under house arrest for money and embezzlement, and Juan Orlando's brothers also incarcerated for narcotics. One thing I want to do is I want to play a clip hitting on that point, right? Somebody who in U.S. mainstream liberal media is heralded all the time, Hillary Clinton, right? Somebody that as Hondurans we know we fucking hate Hillary Clinton, but for a lot of liberals in the U.S., they don't know just how much damage she did in Honduras. So I want to play this clip. This is Berta Cáceres in 2014 calling out Hillary for her role in the coup, and then we'll talk a little bit about that.
Siguieron y siguen los golpistas. Y después con las elecciones, como bien lo dice la misma Hillary Clinton en su libro Decisiones Difíciles, donde prácticamente ella está diciendo lo que va a pasar en Honduras, ¿verdad? Y eso demuestra aún más la injerencia norteamericana en nuestro país. Y ella ahí reconoce que ellos siempre evitaron que Mel Zelaya retornara a la presidencia.
So that's her in 2014 calling out Hillary Clinton. Your thoughts and reaction to that? Somebody connecting it to the U.S., right? Because people don't know how much damage the Democrats have done in Honduras.
Yeah, she was the secretary of the Department of State during that whole thing, and she pretty much like admitted it wasn't even an admission because it wasn't like, yep, I did it. It was more like just a casual fact. She was like, yeah, we pretty much had to support the golpista, and it was obvious. We already knew, people already knew it before, just based on how the United States acted. And then and the fact that she was being heralded as this feminist icon. It just shows the kind of the underdevelopment of like political consciousness in the U.S. in terms of the from the mainstream sort of political factions, which is like a person's identity is enough to demarcate whether or not they deserve our support. That's never been a thing in Latin America. It's never about who you are, but about what you stand for. And so, even with Mel Zelaya, like I said, he was not a leftist. He was not a socialist. Actually, he's part of an elite from Olancho, actually, who just, like I said, who just happens that, he started listening to grassroots movements. And that's a thing in Latin America where a lot of, leaders are not necessarily like these radical socialist people, but at the very least, they're like sympathetic, or they start listening to the people, and it gets to a point where they're forced to because the people are highly organized. We saw this like in Guatemala in the 40s and 50s, where Arbenz and all these folks yeah, they were like liberal and they were, progressive, but they were pushed by the organized sectors. So we have the history of Latin American people are, fucking smart. Obviously, they take any opportunity they have. So if there's a guy that's like, like saying, hey, I'm down. Like they actually hold them accountable to a point, and it goes both ways. Where it could lead to a coup, or it could lead to all these different things. Allende was the same. All these leaders. I think the lesson always been that leaders are always more conservative than the people, and the people are the ones always pushing them. Allende is now understood as like, this socialist icon, and he was. But one of the decisions, this is the other part. He didn't want to arm the workers at one point before the coup, again, because he was this. He had this sort of more pacifist, not pacifist, but like,
electoral.
Yeah, and so he's people were like, actually the worker were like, yo, give us our arms so we can defend this shit. Sorry, I don't know if it's supposed to curse in here. But,
no, you could curse. Yeah.
Okay. He basically decided not to, in many ways, which, again, it's hard to say what would have happened, but all that to say is that the people are always more radical, always pushing for more. This is true everywhere. I mean, any movement you can think of. I mean, I think just the inertia of movements, and once you get into government, like, it's really hard once you become part of the state, like for the sake of stability and all this, you're forced to compromise and do all these things. We see this today in so many state actors, but it's always the people that hold them accountable, because they're the ones who are the most organized. And that's the relationship that we need to see, right? Like, we understand that the government has to do its things that are contingent upon things outside of their control, like international relations, all these things, but also understanding that the people are always going to hold them accountable, or and that's the part that's really key in any survival of any movement, is the people keeping them accountable. We see this in everywhere in Venezuela and Bolivia. It's if the people are with you, they're going to defend you to the end, right? With Venezuela would have been toppled long ago if the people weren't as organized as they are, given how violent the counter the right-wing forces have been. So it's exciting times, and I think that a lot of work is required, but
most definitely. And I think that's a great point you mentioned about the base being more radical than the leaders, because a lot of times people in the US, they think that the Latin American leaders have to be perfect. I deal with this all the time on the left, where some people on the left act very puritanical about leaders. They're like, oh, well, what about this? What about that? It's like, okay, you have to understand that, like, when you're managing a country, you're dealing with all these competing interests, all these different sectors of society. You can't just be going out there all crazy and being like, fuck this, fuck that. Like, you have to a certain degree, like, be able to know how to deal with, like, the business elites, these people, because you're trying to keep the lights on,
especially today, where the economy is fundamentally interconnected in a way that is beyond your control. And this is actually a big reason for the Latin American integration movement, right? Which is that a lot of Chavez and all these people were saying, look, we need to find ways to actually sustain ourselves in a more, we can't rely on these other powers to be able to, when shit hits the fan, they're going to leave us, or so he was right on that. Latin America, goes to the history, in many places, where we used to grow our own food, that's no longer the case, because it's more advantageous to import food that we used to be able to. This is a big problem in Africa, everywhere, right? Or in Haiti, where like the rice farmers were destroyed, so like a U.S. rice could be spoiled there, like all these things. So once you take power, you have to deal with all those things, while at the same time trying to organize your society in a better way. So it's often very difficult, and unless the people have recognized that state has become all the way corrupt, which hasn't been the case in those places, it's always a push to hold them accountable and be able to address those issues, as opposed to like read a coup against them or something. Because Latin American people know that that's usually BS, right? Like who's gonna replace them? Like we are the organized people. Like who's gonna replace them? Like we know it's gonna be a U.S. appointed or a U.S. aligned individual or party or movement. And so,
yeah. What I want to do is I want to share. I don't know if y'all can hear this. Can you hear this? Okay.
Yeah.
So this is Telesud. This is the National Electoral Congress offering their declaration. So let me see if I can translate some of this. Let's see.
Entrar para ejercer el sufragio otra vez y no se pudo. El sistema ha registrado con éxito.
The system has registered with success every detail from every person, every registry of every person.
En el informe que como pleno daremos a conocer, ya
We'll soon give the results. We'll soon give the total and the percentage of peoples who have voted. At this moment, the objective
que el pleno por unanimidad ha emitido insistir que toda
Sorry, I'm like slow with understanding what she's saying. Hold on.
debe ejercer el sufragio.
Something about suffrage and voting. She kind of cut off a little bit, but it seems like right now, as we're talking, obviously the voting is wrapping up. The Consejo Nacional Electoral is finishing the vote counting and all that. So we're gonna keep following it. The results are probably gonna be coming out later on, but I think if anybody wants good coverage, I would suggest Telesud. They have some of the best coverage. What I want to do is I want to wrap up here, comment. It's been really dope speaking to you. I just want to read some of the comments. Compañera Carena said, when Hillary was heckled openly for Berta's murder at the 2016 campaign rallies in LA, she just walked off the stage. Not surprising at all. Blue Moon Red Wine said, it's weird how you always hear about Chile and never Argentina, even though they were way more deaths under Videla than Pinochet. Yeah, that's really interesting. Eli said, Xiomara is going to kick MS-13's ass. Yeah, MS-13 is a product of U.S. imperialism and capitalism. It has to always be. That's how mainstream media, they try to make it seem like gangs in Central America are just a product. We're just inherently violent, but it's really a byproduct of capitalism, of imperialism. Non-standard proletarian says, U.S. Americans expect saints to run Latin American countries. So true, but then they don't apply the same standards to leftist leaders in the U.S. So that's really interesting. Howard says, please mention. Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, who are they? Yeah, please mention the supposed football war in 1969 until the Yankees trying to sanction. Oh, I think I know you're talking about the soccer war in 1960. From what I've heard, it was kind of like there was a lot of weird shit going on with that. But yeah, maybe I can do that in a future episode. What I want to do just to wrap up here is I want to play a clip of 2017, right? We had the same emotion. We were like hyped up. We were like, yo, Xiomara won. I remember actually like we were all like, yo, like Xiomara won, this and that. And then they took it away from her. So I want to show you some footage of the protests that took place after that to give you a sense.
It was
of
Narrala, by the way.
Narrala, my fault, Narrala. And Xiomara back Narrala. And so I want to give you some footage of that just to get a sense of what the Honduran people are like once we are mobilized for our candidates and opposing the government.
Para empeorar,
Esta embajada está metiéndose en los asuntos internos de nuestro país. Ha manifestado que la elección del 26 de noviembre del año pasado fue transparente. Cuando el pueblo hondureño sabe, el mundo entero sabe que hubo fraude y que nos quieren robar el triunfo.
I've been to those protests. They get mad lit, mad crazy. And it's a beautiful experience going to a protest, not only in Honduras, but all over Latin America and the Caribbean, resisting any governments backed by the U.S. By the way, those protests were taking place outside of the U.S. Embassy in Tegucigalpa. One of the men who was speaking, Juan Barahona, who's the leader of the FNRP, the Frente Nacional de Resistencia Popular, National Popular Resistance Front, that was formed after the 2009 coup. He was basically saying that the U.S. government has to stop meddling in the affairs of our country because ultimately it's the U.S. Embassy and the State Department that dictates what ends up happening in Honduras. And that's something that he was pointing out during that protest. So just wrapping up here, compañero Cristian, why don't you give us some final thoughts on, what should we expect within the next few days, your thoughts overall on the election, what you hope to see in a new government of Xiomara if she is able to successfully win and stay in power?
Yeah, I mean, there's the next few days. I doubt the actual electoral agency is going to call the election today. Just from what it sounds like, there's a lot of confusion around the 5 p.m. Closing of the poll of the voting places and all these things. Last week I think it went for days because of all the issues that they were having and with the counting. So I don't really actually see official results from the electoral office today. Save something from the right wing, them then doing what they do. I do think this will be a victory of Libre, but as in the case that they do, get the win and maintain the win, there's so much work to do. I mean, there's a saying that it was from that it was the documentary about the German Revolution. I forgot what's it called, but they were talking about the revolution is hard. It's hard to do the revolution. It's harder to maintain the revolution. It's hard to keep the every step of the way is just as hard. And so with something like an election, it's really important, obviously, right? But like I said, the key thing is going to be that relationship between the state, the politicians, and the organized sectors. I think what Mel was doing in 2008, I obviously was much less politicized and stuff. We need more like that, where it's conversations between the movements and the party officials. The issue with the Garifuna, with the Lenca, all the things that have the state has disrespected, all the judicial basically court cases that have demanded reparations for the Garifuna and Vallecito and Triunfo, all those things. I mean that's where the real faith will be seen, from the sectors, as well as the everywhere else where it's needed. One of the hardest things, and again, this goes back to the nature of imperialism, is going to be how do you get back control? If we're getting to a point of imperialism where countries literally don't even have as much power as they used to be, in the sense that transnational, international capital is so strong that we know now corporations can sue countries who have a bigger revenue stream than the actual country, who have more lawyers in the actual country. So a lot of that, so much the leverage of powers has been so much on multinational corporations beyond the U.S. government. And that's one of the things with countries in the third world and the global south who have been penetrated by international capital in a way that they basically run the country irrespective of who's in office. That's going to be a big challenge, regaining autonomy and sovereignty over the country in ways that will actually make them do the changes. And even within that, being able to effectively, propose policies that will do that. So it is a big challenge ahead. It's going to require obviously a lot of political will, not just from the Libre Party, but from neighboring countries, with alliances. So there's a lot, for all that, it's going to require a lot of political will, both from the state officials and from the organized sectors. Like I said, international capital has a big influence in countries, even though they're not part of the freaking country, but they have arguably more power. So that's going to be a big challenge with doing that. And so, but that's part of the struggle. That's what Bolivia's been doing. That's what Venezuela's been doing. That's what all these countries are doing. It's going to require a more concerted effort. So,
that's such a great point. That's such a great point, man. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think part of the decolonization process it's not just about financial and capitalism and imperialism, and that's certainly part of it, but it's spiritual, it's mental, it's like even food, like something like even, for example, like reintroducing the values of like Honduran food, Honduran culture, Honduran like traditions back to the people, because one of the things that imperialism does is that it wipes out your national culture. It imposes this secondhand bootleg hand-me-down from the global north, right? And wanting to be American, wanting to be this, but it's like rediscovering rediscovering our Hondureñidad and just learning about the history, like learning about Ramón Amaya Amador, the communist author, learning about Lempira and learning about Berta, and you know, all these different things. And it's something that it's going to be important. I hope to see Xiomara and Partido Libre, if everything goes well, fingers crossed, because you know we've been here before. Hopefully, what I would like to see is definitely, like you said, giving more land and autonomy to the Lenca and Garifuna peoples, having for them to have autonomy over their lands. I would like to see the closure. This is going to be a tough one. I would like to see the closure of U.S. military, bases in the country. No more U.S. military, Israeli presence in the country. Obviously, getting rid of laws that criminalize LGBTQ community, getting rid of abortion laws, trading with Venezuela, with Cuba, with Nicaragua, and just also protecting the environment, man. Like I think one thing, when I was in Honduras in 2019, I was in Ciguatepec. I don't know if you're familiar. It's kind of like going toward Tegucigalpa, and just seeing the dry corridor, like how much it's expanding, the desertification of certain areas. Like it's a fucking issue, man. And people's farms are going, like being destroyed because of climate change produced by capitalism and imperialism. And that's something, right? It's systemic. Like we have to get rid of the whole system. But I think a lot can be done. Getting rid of the palm oil plantations in Honduras and diversifying the agriculture. And there's a lot that we can learn from other countries in Latin America, the Caribbean, and the world from that. So those are some of the things that I hope to see. But it's been really dope speaking to you, hermano Cristian Padilla Romero, Honduran with roots in Olancho. Shout out to Olancho, by the way. For those of you who are not familiar, Olancho, they say that's like the quote unquote Wild West of Honduras. That's like where everybody's strapped, everybody has a gun.
It really is a violent history. It's crazy,
Olancho. But that's also where Mir Celaya comes from. A lot of important historical figures in Honduras come from there. So Cristian fights for change in Honduras. He's currently studying the history of Honduras at Yale University. Is there any way people can follow you or support the work that you do, man?
I have a Twitter, but I mean it's actually called Maje Mojado. But I don't really get on it too much. But if you want to follow me, social media can be a little toxic. Sometimes I just don't get on. But yeah, that's where I usually, if I say something, that's where I usually do. But
And by the way, for those of you who are watching, listening, Maje Mojado is an undocumented homie. Maje is like what we say in Honduras for like, yo, it's my Maje, mi Maje, mi homie.
Yeah.
And then Mojado, but with pride, right? Like undocumented, because our people have been displaced, and our people are the hardest working people in the U.S., along with other migrants as well. But yo, thanks again, man. We're gonna keep following the election results in Honduras. Hopefully, Xiomara and Partido Libre will be able to succeed. Hopefully, Honduras will join the anti-imperialist bloc of countries in liberated Latin America and the Caribbean. Peace out, Cristian. It was really dope to talk to you, brother. Hope to have you back on soon. I hope you and your family are well, bro. And we're gonna go out to some music. Again, this is Himno de la Resistencia de Honduras. Peace out, everybody. Take care.
Los pueblos del mundo, todos a una sola voz, gritan viva Honduras, viva su revolución. Vamos todos a luchar, vamos juntos a pelear, pa' que Celaya vuelva ya. Honduras, el pueblo está contigo.